I've been knitting my annual charity hats, and I'm excited to say I just got the box ready, not taped up, but full. And to celebrate, I'm going to share this hat pattern with you. I'll tell you more about the hat charity I participate in and the contest that goes with it at the end of the video. This video includes 4 hats. This is the basic one. This is a version with knit weaving and another version with knit weaving, and one version that's a little bit big on this baby model with some manual fair isle. Any machine can do these. They may be gathered off the machine directly or removed on waste yarn, or you can knit them in a long strip. This pattern is a version of techniques shown in my Stripping for Charity book, where strip knitting is recommended so you can knit a lot of hats. This is the chapter that includes the knit weaving. There's also one on manual fair isle. The pattern that I'm showing you today is similar to, but not identical to, those in the book. One major difference is the gauge. This one is made for bulky yarn, number 5 yarn. It does need to be soft to knit nicely, and we'll knit it at the top of the stitch style using any bulky machine. The patterns in the book come in 2 gauges and fit multiple sizes. Today's pattern will fit babies. Eventually, the written pattern will have multiple sizes, and we'll go into a new bulky book that I'm working on. If you strip knit, this is the pile of hats right off of the machine and what it will look like. I'm not going to go into details about strip knitting here because I have at least several videos really devoted to it, and you can get that technique, the specifics of making a long string of hats, from those videos, and we'll concentrate on this pattern today. Here comes the very basic pattern, and then we will embellish it with 3 different methods. E-wrap 41 needles, set the carriage to main stitch size -2. I'm going to be knitting at 10, so that's 8 for the hem. Knit 12 plain rows for the hem. Hang the E-wraps, either every single one or every other one. Increase stitch size to 10, knit 24 more plain rows, that's the whole hat, and unless you are knitting a strip of hats, gather off the top of the crown on its own yarn tail, then seam the edges. Now let's knit the variations. This is a novelty yarn. I only have 1 skein of it. It came to me as part of an odd lot, not something that I would pick for machine knitting on its own. It's pretty and it's soft, but it's very slubby, and it's usually the kind of thing that's hard to knit on a knitting machine. Plus, I don't really have enough of it to do anything impactful. So this is the perfect yarn to use as a weaving accent. Of the 24 rows above the hem and below the crown, the gathering off point, I have knitted 2 of them. And now I'm going to do a simple manual weaving design over 2 and under 2. Almost every kind of machine will do this kind of weaving, even if it won't do a fancier kind. So the yarn that I wove in is caught in the stitches, but it's not actually knitted. And I see in that case it went over a gate peg. You have to watch for that. If it happens, it must be removed because you know it'll jam the whole works up. Over and under. You can use any sort of manual weaving pattern you want. It can be over and under the same needles each time. It can be over 2 and under 2, over and under 1. Whoops, you must set it to knit back from home. I alternated which needles I went over and under, and because I did that, the design is different than if I had done it on the same ones. This is a good place to just experiment with the effects you want. Particularly if you're doing what I'm doing, knitting a bunch of charity hats. The recipient doesn't have a particular look in mind, and if I'm trying to develop one, I can make something nice that somebody will enjoy while I work out my design. One great thing about the manual weaving technique is it's a massive amount of design bang for your effort buck. I'm going to just do these 4 rows. Of course, this design will show up on the purl side, so that will make the purl side of this hat the right side. With that in mind, you want to have done a very neat job hanging your hem, because that will show. But there it is. There's our design. I'm now 6 rows in, so I will just do 18 more and we can gather this hat off. Using the same novelty yarn as before, let's do something fancy that at first glance will look like a bad idea. If we go over 1 needle and under 5, it's going to leave long floats. And particularly for little children, but really for anybody, I think this is too long a float, but that's okay. We're going to fix it later and make it gorgeous. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, under, over. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And again, you can play around with this. You don't have to do it identically to what I'm showing you. And I've got it worked out so that we end with the whole repeat, which is nice. That will change based on how many needles you're using, what would constitute a whole repeat. And you don't really have to end with one. Okay, this will weave in. You see my long floats. We're going to do the same pattern again this row. Over, under. This time I can see where I went last time, so it can be a good bit faster. And one more time. You can do more than 3 in a row. I'm thinking at this gauge, that's going to be all the stretch I have in my floats. But it varies with every single yarn and gauge, so that's another thing to experiment with. What I just said will become much clearer in one moment. Here's the last weaving row being knitted. Now, let's lift all of these floats and place them on the center needle of the 5 that were slipped. So that's 3. And up they go. Now with all that stuff on the needle, it's definitely going to be easier to keep it there and get it to knit for the next row if we bring it forward. 1, 2, 3. And you could make it funky by putting it on needle 2 instead, so you wouldn't have the peak that we're going to create right in the center. It would be off to one side, which is not the effect I want this time, but it could be interesting. And then we'll go on and just knit the rest of the hat. Another fun thing to do is a small amount of Fair Isle. I've already started with the leftovers of the last bit of my gray being the contrasting color. I've changed to this yarn, another one of my odds and ends. For the main yarn, I've knitted the hem, knitted 2 rows, then began the hand-manipulated Fair Isle. You'll need to check your machine for the settings, but on this one, if I set it to slip, it will work. I knitted the brim at stitch size 7. I would normally go up to stitch size 8 for stockinette, but Fair Isle pulls in quite a lot, so I went up farther. What we want to happen is the carriage to knit only some of the stitches in the main color, which is threaded into the machine. So I will pull forward every other needle, and in the S setting, that will cause what I want to happen. See, it knitted the ones that were pulled forward, and it just went past the others. That little bar of yarn tells you it slipped. For most manually operated machines, there is a setting that will accomplish this. Second row, same as the first. Now we change, because we want 2 rows of the contrasting color to knit on the alternate set of needles. So the carriage setting remains the same. And now we're going to get the gray to knit the needles that were skipped previously. I'm doing something that can be quite useful. I have 2 different weights of yarn. One is a good solid number 4. That's the variegated yarn. And the gray is a number 5. It's okay to mix 2 for a little bit of Fair Isle, because you get a nice, full, kind of plumped up looking set of stitches for the gray stitches. Now I'm going to go back to stockinette settings, both stitch size and dial. And just knit the rest of the hat. My pile of hats will go join the pile that Linda Williams is collecting at the Keeping Maine Warm Hat Charity and Contest. What we do every year is ask knitters to participate, send in hats. They can win a prize. I sponsor some prizes, and so do other machine knitting businesses. And the hats get distributed by volunteer labor all over where the need is great in Maine. From the viewpoint of the knitter, it's a great way to enter a contest and know that your work will be appreciated while you experiment with various techniques and yarns. And of course, from the viewpoint of somebody who is cold and hatless in a Maine winter, it's obviously beneficial. So it's all a good thing. And I will put a link to the contest information page in the program notes.